Good morning, Fearful Christian. Hope you guys had a great weekend. Seemed like kind of a short weekend compared to last weekend's 4-day weekend, but that's all right. We'll get back into the normal swing of things here. And once again, it's Monday. We've got another scripture verse for memorization. So last week we were in the book of Judges. This week we're in the book of Ruth. Now, Ruth takes place during the time of the Judges. In fact, during the last part of the time of the Judges. There's this phrase that's repeated at the end of Judges several times. In fact, the entire book ends on this phrase. And this is what it says. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did whatever he wanted. They're talking about anarchy. Anarchy is the absence of any laws, absence of any regulations, anything like that. Everybody just does what they want. And things are not going well. Things are really bad. In fact, most of the people of Israel are involved in worship of other gods, worship of idols. There's all sorts of sin taking place all over the place. But the book of Ruth is a little bit different. It's designed to offer the people some hope during this time of sin, during this time of idolatry. And that hope comes through the family of Ruth. So what we see here is that Naomi, she is the mother-in-law of Ruth. Naomi has a husband, Elimelech, and Elimelech and Naomi, they're going to move to Moab because in this land there's more food. In Israel they're having a famine right now, so they need to get out of there someplace where they can find food. So they take their two sons find Moabite wives, so their wives are not part of Israel. But they live in Moab for a while, and eventually Elimelech dies. And then 10 years later, both of his sons die as well. So Naomi is left with her two daughters-in-law. Now, if you know about culture during this time, women did not just go, say they lost their husband. Women just didn't go get a job. That's not what happened back then. Things were very, very different during this time. In fact, hopefully in your history classes, you may talk about some of the ways that things were different for women throughout most of history. But things were not going well. And so Naomi tells her two daughters-in-law, go back to Moab. You're still young. Go find new husbands. Everything will be fine. And so Orpah, who's one of the daughter-in-laws, she goes back to Moab. But Ruth says, no, I'm going to stay with you. There's no one to take care of you now. There's no one to make sure that everything is okay. You have no place where you can go get a job. You need some help. So Ruth decides to stick with Naomi to help her in her life. They go back to Israel, and there's a long series of things that take place, including Ruth going out into the fields and collecting barley, and there's a guy there in the fields who owns the field named Boaz, and he's very, very kind to her. And that's where we get our scripture verse this week. It's from Boaz speaking to Ruth, and we're in Ruth chapter 2, verses 10 through 12. And after Boaz allows Ruth to collect grain from the fields, this is what happens. Verse 10 says, Ruth fell at his feet and thanked him warmly. What have I done to deserve such kindness, she asked. I am only a foreigner. Foreigner means she's from another land. She's not from Israel. Yes, I know, Boaz replied, but I also know about everything you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband. I have heard how you left your father and mother and your own land to live here among complete strangers. May the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge, reward you fully for what you have done. It could have been very easy for Ruth to go back to Moab. Again, she was young. She probably could have found another husband, and life probably could have been easy. That's where her family was at. That's where all the people she knew were at. But out of obligation she felt to Naomi, she stayed with Naomi. Took a harder life to stay with Naomi, and that was important. And so Boaz recognized that. Now, one thing I want to point out is that the nation of Israel, remember, we're talking about all the sin, all the idolatry. Most of the nation of Israel was not in a good place right now. But there were some people that were still following God, that were still following all the commandments, everything that God had laid out for the people to do. One of those people was Boaz. In fact, Boaz told his men to not allow Ruth to go to other fields to get grain because he was concerned for her safety. Remember, most of the nation are not following God. Ruth could have been in very real danger if she had gone to the fields of somebody who was not following God. Because, see, in the law, it said that the people of Israel were supposed to allow people who were in hard times to collect the excess grain from their field. If someone was not following the laws in other ways, why would they follow that law? They might have maybe thought that Ruth was stealing their grain, and they might have hurt her or killed her for taking grain from their land. So Boaz did not want anything to happen to her. So he said, make sure that she always gets enough grain from our land. In fact, drop some extra grain on the ground that she can pick up so that she always has enough, so that she doesn't have to go into somebody else's fields to collect, because it might have been dangerous for her. And so through a long series of process, in fact, there's all sorts of interesting things that take place during this process of Boaz and Ruth eventually getting married. Ruth ends up uncovering Boaz's feet at one point. It's kind of weird, but it's all cultural things that are very important during their time. Boaz seals a transaction of buying a piece of property and the way they seal the property is by taking off a sandal, and they exchange sandals, and that was supposed to seal the deal. I mean, all kinds of weird stuff. But you learn a lot about Jewish culture when you read the book of Ruth. But the important thing is, Boaz recognized all the sacrifices Ruth had made. And Boaz became what's called a kinsman redeemer for Ruth. Redeemed the family name. Make sure the family name of Elimelech carried on by marrying her, and he ended up buying the property that Elimelech and his sons previously owned, and so that the name of Elimelech could carry on through his daughter-in-law. And so the repercussions of this are that there is still hope in the nation of Israel. There are still good things taking place in the nation of Israel. Even though the whole country is going downhill, there is still a spot of hope. In fact, Ruth, who, remember, she is not from Israel. She is a Moabite. She is one of the ancestors of Jesus, because she gives birth to a son named Obed. Obed is the father of Jesse, and Jesse is the father of King David. And so there, in this time and in this region of darkness, there is a glimmer of hope. And that hope, we see a redeemer, a person who takes Ruth, who's in a very bad place, marries her, and then brings her into a place of being in a good place now. And it's very interesting that this idea of marriage and redemption carries throughout the Bible. In fact, later on in the New Testament, we understand that Jesus is the bridegroom, the church is the bride. And so we see this idea of Jesus marrying the church, and that through that marriage comes redemption. That's the same theme we're seeing here in the Old Testament. And through that, there is redemption that takes place. You're taken out of a bad place, and you're brought into a good place. Ruth was taken out of a bad place and brought to a good place because Boaz recognized all the good things that she had done for her mother-in-law, Naomi. And this book is, well, it's a short book. It is rich in Jewish culture, tradition, customs, and it looks forward to the coming Messiah. And that's the most important thing here. In all the darkness, it's looking forward to the coming Messiah, the ultimate Redeemer, who's going to redeem all of our lives. I could go on probably for hours about all the implications of the book of Ruth, but I'm going to stop right there because we'll have time to talk about it all throughout the week. We'll also hear about it on Friday. I've got a guest speaker coming in on Friday. Hope you guys will enjoy our guest speaker on Friday. And again, hope you guys are talking about it throughout the week, hopefully in Bible class, hopefully in devotions. You guys are talking about this book of Ruth because it's a fantastic book, a lot of deep, rich things taking place within the context of this book. And it's a book that definitely needs to be explored by everyone. All right, hope you guys have a fantastic week. See you around campus. God bless.